This is Land of Havilah, 1 Samuel 26. David and his men are still moving around in the south edge of the Judean wilderness. Now coming up, they've gone back to the hill of Hakilah near the town of Ziph. Last time he was in the area, the Ziphites turned him in, and they're about to do it again. Verse 1. The Ziphites came to Saul to Gibeah, saying, "Doesn't David hide himself in the hill of Hakilah, which is before the desert?" Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul encamped in the hill of Hakilah, which is before the desert, by the way. But David stayed in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him in the wilderness. Comment: David heard Saul was coming with his 3,000, so he abandoned his camp at the hill of Hakilah, and Saul moved into it. David slipped into the nearby wilderness. Verse 4. David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul had certainly come. Then David arose and came to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his army. Saul lay within the place of the wagons, and the people were encamped around him. Comment: David's spies found Saul's camp, and David came to have a look for himself. Predictably, Saul's in the middle of the camp, and they set up the wagons around him for maximum protection. Also predictably, Saul's highest-ranking man, Abner, is at the center of the camp as well. David's still looking at the camp as we go to verse 6. Then David answered and said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, "Who will go down with me to Saul to the camp?" Abishai said, "I will go down with you." Comment: Those are three names we haven't heard before. Interestingly, one of them is a Hittite. The Hittites were one of the 7 nations Yahweh slated for complete destruction in Deuteronomy 7:1, one of the nations of which Yahweh said, "You shall make no covenant with them," Exodus 23:28 through 32. But this particular Hittite is supporting David, and David has accepted him. David and the Hittite are obviously in covenant with each other. So this is a foreshadowing of Christ's acceptance of the Gentiles. In the future, David will be entering into harmonious relationships with other men of the 7 goat nations as well. One of them, King Hiram of Tyre, will even be a key player in the building of the temple after David passes away, part of a very holy effort. And that was the first mention of Joab. He'll be David's top commander in the future. As Abner is to Saul, so Joab will be to David. Abishai is Joab's brother, and he just agreed to go into the camp with David. Where did David get the idea of walking into Saul's camp? It must be Yahweh moving him to do so. Verse 7. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the place of the wagons, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the people lay around him. Comment: David and Abishai walked into the sleeping camp all the way to Saul and Abner. Verse 8. Then Abishai said to David, "God has delivered up your enemy into your hand today. Now therefore please let me strike him with the spear to the earth at one stroke, and I will not strike him the second time." Comment: Abishai says, "Please let me kill Saul with his own spear. I'll only have to strike him once. You'll be king, and we'll be done running for our lives." Christ could do away with Satan any time, and he could take his rightful place as king, but for some reason, it's not yet in God's timing. Satan still pursues the church to persecute it, but Christ is waiting for the time the Father hands him the kingdom. Verse 9. David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against Yahweh's anointed and be guiltless?" David said, "As Yahweh lives, Yahweh will strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go down into battle and perish. Yahweh forbid that I should stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. But now please take the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let's go." Comment: David told Abishai, "Don't kill Saul. Yahweh can strike him any time he wants, or he'll live out his days, or he'll die in battle, but it won't happen by me." Verse 12. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away, and no man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from Yahweh was fallen on them. Then David went over to the other side and stood on the top of the mountain afar off, a great space being between them, and David cried to the people. Comment: David's calling out to Saul's camp, still in verse 14. And to Abner the son of Ner, saying, "Don't you answer me, Abner?" Then Abner answered, "Who are you who cries to the king?" David said to Abner, "Aren't you a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king your lord. This isn't good that you have done. As Yahweh lives, you are worthy to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, Yahweh's anointed. Now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head. Comment: the spear and jar of water are missing, which is proof that David spared Saul's life. David says Abner should die because he didn't protect Yahweh's anointed. In other words, David's affirming that Saul should be protected, not killed. Verse 17. Saul knew David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." He said, "Why does my lord pursue his servant? For what have I done? What evil is in my hand? Now therefore please let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is so that Yahweh has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering." Comment: David says to Saul, if Yahweh has stirred you up against me, it's because you've done something to offend Yahweh. Otherwise, he wouldn't curse you with such an inappropriate anger against me. So bring Yahweh an offering, and he'll forgive you and remove this evil tendency, this evil desire to kill me. Now coming up, David says, if Yahweh didn't put it in you, if it's men who stirred you up against me, still in verse 19, but if it is the children of men, they are cursed before Yahweh, for they have driven me out today that I shouldn't cling to Yahweh's inheritance, saying, go serve other gods. Comment: since David's on the run, he's detached from Israel. He can't worship at the tabernacle or fulfill his obligations to Yahweh as commanded in the law of Moses. He's left without a church, so to speak. His only option is to worship in some sort of makeshift fashion outside of the system that Yahweh has set up. So in a sense, Saul is cutting David off from Yahweh. But in reality, Yahweh is very much with David, even though he's outside the law of Moses. This is a foreshadowing of the end of the law and the beginning of worship in spirit and truth. Yahweh's blessing David outside the system and rejecting Saul within the system. David goes on, verse 20. Now therefore don't let my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of Yahweh, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Comment: David says he's harmless, verse 21. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes today. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. Comment: Saul humbled himself, declared peace, and invited David to return, but David knows better than to go back to Saul. Verse 22. David answered, Behold the spear, O king. Then let one of the young men come over and get it. Yahweh will render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness, because Yahweh delivered you into my hand today, and I wouldn't stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. Behold, as your life was respected today in my eyes, so let my life be respected in Yahweh's eyes, and let him deliver me out of all oppression. Comment: David says, I've done the right thing by not killing you, so since I'm doing right, may Yahweh support me. He says Yahweh will render to every man his righteousness and faithfulness. In other words, Yahweh keeps accounts, and he repays those who do the right thing. Verse 25. Then Saul said to David, You are blessed, my son David. You will both do mightily and will surely prevail. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. Comment: David didn't rejoin Saul. Each went his own way. David honored Saul, but didn't trust him. May God show us whom to trust. 1 Samuel 27 is next at landofhavilah.net. 1 Samuel 27. This is the map of 1 Samuel 26. Saul came to the hill of Hakilah, somewhere near Ziph. This is Ziph. Then Saul went back to Gibeah. 1 Samuel 27 is next.